For more than 6 centuries, one empire fought almost nonstop, not just against a single enemy, but against kings and sultans, republics and crusaders, rebels, rival dynasties, and eventually the rising powers of Europe. They conquered lands, lost them, redrew their borders, survived internal crises, and marched armies from the Balkans to North Africa, from Central Europe to the deserts of Arabia. That alone would be impressive. But what truly made this empire different was something far rarer. They did not go bankrupt while doing all of it, because the Ottoman Empire didn't just know how to fight wars. It understood something far more important: how to finance war again and again for centuries sustainably. Welcome to the Economic Historian. You are in the place where money, power, and history intersect. And here, nothing is ever as simple as it looks. The Ottoman Empire survived from roughly 1299 to 1922. Longer than the Roman Empire. Longer than the British Empire. Longer than nearly every empire and state the modern world usually talks about. But longevity alone is not the most interesting part. The real mystery is this: how did an empire that fought almost constantly avoid collapsing under the financial weight of war? In Western historical narratives, empires are usually explained through wars, victories, defeats, famous generals, decisive moments on the battlefield. But what bankrupts states is not war itself, its budgets, its logistics, its broken financial systems, its leaders. The Ottoman Empire learned this lesson very early. Instead of copying the European model, a system where kings raised heavy taxes, paid soldiers directly, borrowed aggressively, and hoped future victories would cover the cost, the Ottomans built something fundamentally different. A structure where war didn't consume the state, but activated the system. But to understand how that was possible, we first need to clarify what the Ottomans actually were. Because for Western audiences, the Ottoman Empire is often nothing more than imagery: turbans and sultans, domes and palaces, Janissaries marching in formation. The images are familiar. The engine behind them is not. So let's slow down. Let's lean back. And as the economic historian, let's look together at where we need to stand to understand this story. The Ottomans began as a small frontier, beylik, in northwest Anatolia. They were not rich. They were not powerful. They did not inherit an empire. Osman, the man whose name the empire would carry, was essentially a warlord with a few thousand fighters, and a talent for being in the right place at the right time. As Byzantine authority weakened and Mongol power withdrew from the region, Osman and his followers saw opportunity where others saw chaos, and every early victory mattered, not only militarily but financially as well. Because conquest meant land, land meant production. Production meant taxes. From the very beginning, war was not just about survival or glory. It was about income. This is the first key to understanding the Ottoman system. War was not seen as a cost. It was seen as a revenue stream. When the Ottomans captured Bursa in 1326 and crossed into Europe in the mid-14th century, they were no longer a frontier force. They were becoming the power that controlled the crossroads between Europe and Asia. In medieval economics, that was everything. Intercontinental trade flowed through Ottoman lands. Venetian merchants, Persian caravans, Arab traders, Balkan trade routes. Every one of them passed through Ottoman territory. And every movement produced customs, passage fees, and taxes. This mattered because war requires 3 things: food, metal, and men. The Ottomans did not necessarily have more soldiers than their rivals. They did not always have better weapons either. But they had something even more important than both: a constant cash flow: silk from China, spices from India, carpets from Iran, horses, timber, sugar, copper, weapons. The empire sat on the arteries of the pre-modern world economy, and instead of relying on occasional windfalls, the Ottomans built systems that continuously fed this flow. But even strong revenue alone does not explain 6 centuries of campaigns. Many empires were wealthy and still collapsed under military costs. What made the Ottomans different was structural. They redesigned the relationship between the state, the army, and money. And this brings us to one of the most important and most misunderstood innovations in Ottoman history: the timar system. Modern states spend enormous sums on personnel payrolls. Professional soldiers require salaries, equipment, pensions, and long-term financial burdens. Armies drain treasuries. The Ottomans solved this problem by refusing to pay their soldiers in cash. They paid them in rights. A timar was essentially a tax district. A cavalryman, known as a sepahi, was granted the right to collect taxes from a specific village or region. In return, he had obligations. He bought his own equipment, he fed his horse, and he showed up fully armed when the campaign season came. No salary, no state payroll. The soldier financed himself. This was the peak of financial engineering. It dramatically reduced state expenses. The soldier invested in local stability because stable villages meant reliable income. Peasants lived under predictable authority, not arbitrary extraction, and the empire could raise large armies without emptying its treasury. From a modern perspective, this may seem dangerous, almost reckless. But in the 14th and 15th centuries, it worked extraordinarily well. It turned Ottoman cavalry into a tax-powered war machine. And more importantly, it did this: it made Ottoman warfare cheap. European kingdoms relied on mercenaries who demanded upfront payment, or on expensive feudal elites. When the money ran out, loyalty ran out too. The Ottoman system did not collapse even in peacetime. Revenue kept flowing. War simply activated the existing structures. But the timar system was not the only mechanism that enabled the Ottoman Empire to finance 6 centuries of war. The second pillar of Ottoman military power and finance was infantry. And here we arrive at the Janissaries. Western audiences often recognize them as a military unit, but in reality they were far more than that. The Janissaries were elite professional soldiers. They were disciplined, trained from a young age, and loyal not to family, tribe, or region, but to the state. For the Middle Ages they were revolutionary, but what truly made them unique was how the empire acquired and financed them. Through the devshirme system, children were taken from Christian villages in the Balkans. They were converted to Islam, educated in the empire's military schools, and prepared to serve as soldiers or administrators. This system was harsh, it was coercive, and it was ethically deeply problematic. It must not be romanticized. But financially, it solved a massive problem. Raising a child to adulthood is expensive. For most states, that cost is unavoidable. The Ottomans shifted that burden outward. Conquered populations bore the cost of childhood. The state invested in education, but avoided decades of maintenance costs. The result was fully formed, loyal, professional soldiers at a fraction of the lifetime expense other empires faced. Early Janissaries were salaried, housed, and tightly controlled. Restrictions on marriage and commerce prevented conflicts of interest and political fragmentation. While the timar system turned cavalry into a self-financing force, the Janissaries turned infantry into a low-cost professional corps. Together they created something rare: an army that did not automatically push the state into bankruptcy. And every conquest strengthened the system further. New land meant new taxpayers, new timars, new trade routes, new ports. A European kingdom could win a war and come home poorer. The Ottoman Empire often came home richer. The essence of long-term survival lies here. This wasn't luck, it was a cash flow strategy. The empire also relied on state monopolies: salt, coffee, tobacco, and soap, essential goods under direct state control. And to understand these monopolies, you have to think about geography first. The Ottoman Empire controlled the Straits, the Aegean, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the caravan routes stretching toward Iran and Central Asia. So if you wanted to move goods from Europe to Asia or from Asia to Europe, you paid the Ottomans for silk from China, for spices from India, for carpets from Iran. Venetian merchants, Arab traders, Balkan caravans, North African fleets, all of them, at some point, passed through the empire's toll booth. This system worked so well that by the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire had become one of the richest states in the world. War was expensive, but trade was far more profitable, and the Ottomans built financial systems that tapped directly into that profit. One of those systems was state monopolies. Goods like salt, tobacco, and coffee were under direct state control. These were not luxuries, they were part of everyday life, which meant one thing: revenue flowed into the treasury regularly and predictably, whether there was war or not. This is where the story begins to feel eerily modern, because state monopolies are the ancestors of today's strategic national industries. Think of oil in Saudi Arabia. Think of gas pipelines in Russia. Think of the Suez Canal in Egypt. Every empire has a revenue anchor. For the Ottomans, these monopolies, while not operating on trillions instead of millions, were the closest thing to a constant and reliable income machine. Another financial strategy was tribute and vassal states. Various regions from Wallachia to Crimea made regular annual payments to the Ottoman treasury in exchange for protection or autonomy. Accepting tribute instead of ruling directly was often cheaper and more profitable. These revenues financed soldiers. They sustained roads, fortresses, and fleets. And for centuries this system worked. The Ottomans avoided a massive national debt. They were not dependent on foreign creditors. They financed war through land, trade, tribute, and their own internal mechanisms. There was no giant debt spiral, no bond market draining the treasury, no foreign lenders deciding the empire's fate. This was both the true genius of the Ottoman financial system and the foundation of the weakness that would emerge later. But no system lasts forever. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the world changed. Trade no longer flowed primarily through land routes, but through the oceans. European states industrialized. Their armies adopted new technologies: firearms, artillery units, standing armies. All of it required cash. Suddenly, the things the Ottoman Empire had relied on for centuries, caravans, passage fees, timar income, were no longer enough to finance modern wars. Worse still, the system began to unravel from within. The timar system deteriorated. Local tax holders abused their authority. Central oversight weakened. Tax abuses increased. A structure that had once financed the army by itself was losing its reliability. And then came the Janissaries. Over centuries, they stopped being merely a military corps. They gained political influence. They accumulated wealth and privileges. They became a state within a state. Their financial independence and political power made them uncontrollable. They opposed reforms. They drained the treasury. And eventually, they became one of the biggest obstacles to modernization. The empire was now facing a choice it had postponed for centuries: build modern armies, or fall behind. But modern armies require cash, and to finance that, the Ottomans stepped onto a path they had once deliberately avoided: borrowing. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire began borrowing from European banks at high interest rates. The European powers it had once defeated now controlled its finances. Debts grew, payments faltered, interest compounded. A debt spiral began, and in 1881, the empire was forced to surrender its financial sovereignty to an international commission dominated by Britain and France. A humiliating end to centuries of financial independence. An empire that had mastered war finance lost its independence not on the battlefield, but in accounting ledgers. Does that feel familiar? A great power rises through financial discipline, sustains itself through innovative systems, ignores early warning signs, and collapses when the economy stops working. And that brings us to today. If the Ottoman system feels ancient, take a look around you. The same mechanisms still exist. They've simply taken on a modern appearance. The timar system shows up today as government contracts and privatized military logistics. Modern states outsource much of their military operations to private companies, reducing direct payroll burdens, just as the Ottomans once did. Trade tolls have evolved into struggles over control of sea lanes and energy routes. From the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea, whoever controls a choke point controls the revenue that flows through it. State monopolies still live on. National oil companies, sovereign wealth funds, Saudi Aramco plays the same function the Ottoman salt monopoly once did. Only the scale has moved from millions to trillions. Conquest and the financing of conquest are still with us. Today we call them resource-driven wars. Countries pursue influence not for glory, but for energy reserves, minerals, pipelines, and strategic geography. And the late-stage borrowing that contributed to the Ottoman collapse echoes today in modern sovereign debt crises, Argentina, Greece, and even the modern U.S. debt debate. Financial logic does not change, uniforms do. And the deeper warning beneath this story is this. Financial systems keep empires alive as long as they work, but one day, when they stop working, nothing can save them. If this story changed the way you see the world, subscribe, because here we're not just listing events, we're examining the reasons behind them. History is silent, yet full of answers. What matters is knowing where to look. And on this channel, that's exactly what we do.